Welcome to the Busy Fit podcast. Welcome to the Busy Fit podcast. This is our first episode of 2025. It is now January 24th, if you're listening to this. It's crazy that it took us till almost the end of January to get things up and running again. This is actually an episode that I had previously recorded, and our editor messaged me back as he was working on it and said it has no sound. So went through the whole episode, thought it was great, was really excited about it, and it didn't even record. So we're redoing this. We figured out most of the technical issues. It probably sounds a little bit different today. We're still going to be refining that. So bear with me over the next couple episodes as we kind of re-dial in that studio environment, kind of make sure it sounds proper and the best audio quality for you. So just some kind of housekeeping stuff as far as headed into 2025. We will be getting back to releasing episodes that are released every Friday morning. We have some exciting episodes coming up. We're going to do some introductory episodes with some of our new coaches. We're going to touch on some common topics around health and fitness and being an ex-college athlete and all of that stuff. So we're excited to bring that all to you. Today, we're starting with a topic basically that is a pretty important one, I think, just to address for athletes or ex-college athletes in general. It's just understanding, like, you used to be able to eat as much as you want when you were an athlete, and now you're not training 20 hours a week. You have a family, you have kids, you have all of this, kind of requirements on what you do every single day, and you just aren't going to need the same stuff that you used to need, but you still want to enjoy food, and you don't want it to feel restrictive. And so we're going to kind of dive into like what that looks like and kind of why that happens, just some background as far as like why you may kind of struggle with that now that you are removed from the athletic environment. So why do athletes feel like they need to eat nonstop, maybe possibly binge, or feel like they're going to overeat or undereat and kind of struggle to find that balance? And it really does start with being an athlete from a very young age. And obviously, as we are starting in sports, most of us that competed in college started sports anywhere between like age of like 5 and 10 years old. And that's, when you kind of just started to have that passion for the sport that you do and the things that you may have potentially, competed in for the last 15, 20 years. And, depending on how far removed you are from your sport, it's something that you may still be, potentially struggling with. And that's just understand that, as an athlete, we do have an incredibly high caloric demand. Training 20 hours a week takes a lot out of your body, it takes a lot out of your mind, takes a lot of just energy to be able to perform at a high level, be a student, have all these different environments. And one coach that I used to work with, he'd always tell us, hey, athletes can do two of three things really well. They can either do athletics, academics, or social really well. And the main reason they say that isn't so much to say, hey, you can't have one of these elements, but more so to kind of help you understand that you already are putting out such a high output you are already putting out such a high output on a daily basis as an athlete that it can be really hard to put that energy in different areas just because it's a difficult lifestyle. I don't think if you're a non-athlete that you truly understand what ex-athletes or what ex-college athletes go through on a daily basis, waking up and training at 5 a.m. and then going to class all day and then going back to practice and you're kind of trying to take care of the aches and pains that pop up and being hungry constantly and having to study later at night or more on the weekends because you are someone that's devoting that 20 to 25 hours a week just committed to your sport. And, one thing that we'll dial all the way back to when we talked about kind of when we were younger is that caloric intake. And it's like you're constantly being fed food and you're constantly told, hey, I need to eat more. Or, hey, like here's a plate. And you get into high school and you're growing. You're like, hey, you got to eat, got to eat, got to eat, got to eat, got to eat. And it's just something that you always hear. I remember when I was training 3 times a day, going from morning practice, school all day, afternoon practice, and I would stop at home. My mom would make a big bowl of Velveeta mac and cheese for me. This was addition to my dinner. This is on the way, like for me to eat, kind of like either right before or on the way or when I got to the pool for my 3rd practice of the day. And that bowl, when I think back and actually look at what that actually was, that was 800 to 1,000 calories that I was just downing, and then I was going and hopping in the water and training just like it was nothing. And that if you did that today, you would probably feel awful and you probably wouldn't sleep well. And you really don't need that many calories. And so it's tough when you go from always needing a high caloric output to one day you finish your sport and all of a sudden you're not training 20 hours a week. You don't need that high level of input constantly. And so that can be a really difficult thing to navigate because it's not a smooth transition. It's not like, hey, yeah, junior year, we're competing a lot. Senior year, we start to back off. We know we're competing less, so we kind of transition. It's like, no, you finish that last competition, boom, you're done. And there's no kind of just like transition away from it. You lose your teammates, you lose that environment, you graduate, you go live in a new space, you start a new job, you start an entirely new life. And food can kind of become a comfort in that because that's the one thing you always knew is you could eat a lot. And so having that taken away can be a really difficult thing to balance. And then we think about like, yes, the caloric intake side of things, but then there's just the mindset around food in general. Depending on what level you competed at, food's always been there for performance. Food's always been there to help you be at your best. And, you enjoy the fact that you could eat, but it's one of those things that's always kind of been a discussion among athletes. And, you compete at the Division I level, you have a dietitian and a team there telling you like, hey, this is what you should eat, or shoving a protein shake in your face after you finish a lift, or, seeing what you're eating at meals and kind of like, hey, like you don't need that much or you need more, and so it's always kind of had this stigma around it, not just being something that you can purely enjoy, but something that there have to be these like restrictive barriers around, and it's not very freeing. And that can be a really tough thing to come out of when, one, you don't have those people telling you those things anymore, but also those voices can kind of stay in your head and impact your decisions and how you feel. And it's honestly nice when you just don't have that anymore. And it's like, great, I can just eat what I want and enjoy food and not feel like I have to be restricted. And, that can lead to, the binging side of things, or not having a good relationship with food, or, eating all the stuff that maybe you have been told you couldn't have over the years. And, that mentality and working through that can be really difficult for an ex-athlete to kind of navigate like, okay, I want to keep enjoying food, but I'm also not training much anymore. So how do I do that? And how do I navigate this space? And that can be a really difficult thing if you don't have any kind of guidance to work through it. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And lastly, team environment and that team culture is incredible. The feeling of having a locker room of people that are just like there to accomplish a common mission, having coaches holding you accountable, having a structure in place where it's like we're all striving towards this thing, and it has this slow build up from preseason through the regular season when there's just a grind through into that postseason when you are expecting to compete at a really high level, and you're always thinking about preparing for that. And so you've always had like team meals. Team meals are always kind of like a cool thing, and you feel like you're fueling, and you feel like you're bonding with your friends, and it's like all centered around food. And depending on what level you compete at, again, like food was always ready. You go to a Division I school, and they have the best dining halls, and they have snacks available to you 24/7. It's always around. So it's like kind of something you're constantly thinking like, I just got to constantly fuel and feed and do all this on top of always being surrounded by it. There was literally legislation that said if we wanted to have like a team culture, team bonding moment, it had to be like an occasional meal. Basically, it had to be like, oh, we were feeding the team, and we had to like submit a form for it, go in and basically like, yeah, we're feeding the meal because of this reason. And, the food was the focus on it. So we had to like, provide a really good meal, just get people together to have a team environment. And, when you do that, it makes everyone think like food's the center point. And now it's like food's meant to be enjoyed. Food's meant to be something that's a great part of your life and something that you can look forward to and, be a foodie like us and look forward to some of the best restaurants that are out there. But it doesn't have to detract from those goals that you have. It just needs to fit in a little bit differently. And finding that balance after just like having all of these different areas that impact your relationship with food can be really difficult to navigate. Some of the biggest challenges that someone, deals with right when they're out of school, and, these things, like if you're aware of them, it's great, but most people aren't necessarily aware of what they're going through from a transition, from a caloric standpoint, from a, just eating and nutritional standpoint in general. But one of the biggest ones we see is you're not as active as you used to be. And so how do you know like what's enough, what's not enough? You're used to feeling like I got to snack every few hours and I got to, make sure I get these big meals in. Am I getting enough? Am I getting enough? Now, our activity level may have gone down from 20 hours a week all the way down to maybe nothing, maybe 4 hours a week. But how do you know what's right for your body for that intake? And you're kind of just like guessing, trying to figure all that out and navigate that. And that can be a really difficult thing to, kind of work through on your own. And, finding that equilibrium, finding that balance that doesn't lead to, you potentially being unhappy with, the meals that you're having, or feeling like you have to restrict or, do some strict diet to kind of make things work. And it's just a lot to kind of figure out for yourself and ultimately be able to work through and find a way to be healthy, but also maintaining an enjoyable and healthy relationship with food. And the next area is just emotional and habitual eating. With food always being the center point, and the snacking habits that can develop in school, where it's like you need those constant calories. Food can be structured kind of from an award standpoint. See it a lot in rivalry games at the college level. Where it's like, okay, like you win, you get this meal; you lose, you get this meal, or And thankfully, I never participated in anything where it was like that type of environment, but it's a real thing, and food can be treated as a reward. And you may not necessarily recognize, and I'll never forget, it was actually Halloween of the first year that I was a head coach. And we were, basically like doing a Halloween workout. And it was, Halloween themed. I made it like something kind of special, but basically halfway through, I was like, hey, like everyone get changed. I have food for you waiting in the building next door. And we basically had, pumpkins they could carve, and we had this great meal there, and it's really cool. But looking back, we kind of like put the food up on a pedestal, something that we were looking forward to. And, people binged and they had a great time and they enjoyed that camaraderie. But also, like thinking back, it's like, we made it seem like it was this really special thing to take advantage of. And food is meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to be something that you appreciate, but it isn't necessarily meant to be something where it's like, this is something that makes us happy. And those moments kind of can tend to do that. And, it's an area that is definitely difficult to navigate. And then you have coaches and dietitians and strength coaches all telling you whether you should eat, when you should eat, what you should eat, how much you should eat, giving feedback on your plate when you're just trying to enjoy a meal after you've had a stressful day of competition or a stressful day of class. And all of those things play a big impact into developing those emotional and habitual eating habits. And so, I don't think it's something that, coaches necessarily mean to do, but is a byproduct of that process of being in a competitive environment. When you remove that, you kind of exacerbate. I can never say that word, so I'm not even going to try and say it well. But I'm going to go with exaggerate, basically the effects of that emotional habitual eating, and leading to other habits kind of being difficult to form when everything in your life is changing at the same time. And lastly, just a lack of awareness around like what lifestyle nutrition looks like, because you've always eaten for performance. You've always eaten to train, and you've always eaten to compete at a high level. It's never been like, yeah, how do I just like make sure that I'm healthy and at the right, body composition for me to, live a long and healthy life and have energy throughout the day, not have digestive issues and sleep well and all of those things. Like that's not really discussed or talked about enough in the performance setting, because everything's so like focused on you just trying to perform at a high level. And so that world is something that's entirely new, and something's just like not talked about enough. And I know some dietitians do try to like kind of build in that lifestyle into being an athlete and think like that's the right approach. But I've always thought of it as, okay, like very intentional. Like, yes, we can eat towards performance, but we should also be teaching how to eat. Like, how would this look if we were not eating for performance? We were just being a normal person. And that's where I think education can really be increased from the perspective of just helping people understand, okay, like this is, we're eating like this now. Now, if you were not training like this is probably how you should do it. And kind of more coaching along those lines to prepare people for life afterwards. That's also where we, spend a lot of time. People think like they don't want to do a nutrition coaching program again because they feel like they're going to just like redevelop those habits. But in the reality of it, you're actually just learning how to do it healthy for the first time, and removing those unhealthy habits that have been developed, and putting in food in a context where it's something that you can enjoy, but also can be a part of a healthy lifestyle. And that's a lot more enjoyable and healthy for you versus that, habits that you may have developed when you were an athlete. So tools to kind of get out of that, like eat nonstop, eat big, train big mentality when you have either just finished your sport or maybe been removed from your sport for 5, 10, 15 years. And so you're just kind of trying to figure all that out. And the most important thing I would say is just like practice kind of just mindful eating. Don't think about it in terms of, having to put a certain amount of food on your plate, but start to recognize like, am I hungry? Am I full? Am I taking the time to properly chew? Um, you can definitely like journal and track your hunger cues and kind of just see how you're doing with things without putting a judgment on it. If you just base off of like, am I full? Am I hungry? Am I not hungry? It can help you just have a little bit better understanding of it and not have to feel like you have to do some crazy tracking to be able to lose weight or make progress or be healthy as an ex-college athlete. Next thing that you can do if you don't necessarily like kind of feel like you fall in the camp of that more mindful eating approach is you can absolutely track and understand like kind of where you're at just for a little while, because you have to understand that your caloric intake went from being something, or caloric activity level went from being incredibly high to very low. It's like let's kind of just like reset that and just see like, okay, what are we actually eating? It doesn't necessarily have to be compared to another number, like a number that's put out there, but even just having an awareness of what you're consuming can help you kind of get to a point where you understand what it's doing for your body and how much you need to be eating and what that kind of looks like in a way that you can actually enjoy. You'd be surprised how much that just like awareness of what you're eating can make a really big impact on how you feel and the results that you get. Next thing is, strategic meal planning. We are taught to kind of be grazers as athletes, and you put it into a setting of, you're eating your meals, 3 meals a day, you're trying to train, you're doing 20 hours a week, you're going to be snacking constantly, you're constantly going to be hungry, and you're constantly going to be like fueling on something. And that teaches us to think we like constantly have to be consuming food, which is true for some people and not so much for others, but it's got to be the right process for you. But we want to shift more towards having a process and strategic plan in place to be able to continue to enjoy food, but know what we're eating when we're eating. And that doesn't take like planning out or doing a long meal prep on Sunday. It doesn't take like preparing a bunch of chicken and broccoli and rice and eating it for 7 days a week. It just takes being aware and knowing, regardless of kind of what situation pops up, here's how we're handling it. Here's how I'm going to nourish my body. And that can be as simple as taking 5 minutes the night before and just saying, okay, well, tomorrow I don't know what I'm going to do for lunch. Just putting some sort of plan in place to know what you're eating, because you're not going to want to be reactive. Reactivity and not having a plan in place for nutrition leads to eating fast food, eating highly processed foods, eating things that are kind of on a whim and aren't necessarily healthy for you. Make that decision the night before so you don't have to plan as much in that moment. Or you just think about putting a process in place that's going to help you be able to make decisions when you don't have a plan. Because the reality is like life is never normal. Life just gets busier and busier. You can't expect things to be perfectly structured all the time with your nutrition. Things are going to change. So it's like, how do I kind of plan for those unplanned moments, and what strategic skills, habits, and coping mechanisms do I need in place to be able to stay on track regardless what pops up? And lastly, think about rebuilding the relationship with food. Think about, instead of like fueling for performance and food is purely fuel, like think about food as something that you can enjoy and look forward to and have as it can absolutely be a hobby. Like I said, we're big foodies. We love, trying the best restaurants in town and traveling places and trying the best restaurant. And I've always been a big believer, if I know someone that's traveling to a city that I've been to, I'm absolutely going to recommend the best restaurant there, regardless whether it's healthy or not, because food can be enjoyed and it doesn't have to be something where you cut out quality or really good food just because you want to be healthy. Those things can absolutely coincide together if things are just set up in a way that's going to allow you to not have to feel guilty about that, but also get the results that you're looking for. And it's definitely important to remove any judgment around food. I think we see a lot of people that feel like they have something on their plate and someone's going to say something about it, and that's one of the worst habits you can develop. It's kind of how you develop binging habits, people not wanting to eat, social fear of eating in public. All of these things are very common with ex-college athletes because we're always like thinking about that food as fuel. And now it's like, just allow yourself to enjoy it and have a good relationship with what you're eating, and don't worry so much about what someone may or may not say about your plate. But it's also important to let people around you know, like, hey, like I always had someone commenting on my plate, and that's something to be aware of to not say, because that's not a healthy thing for someone to be exposed to. In reality, is like no one should be commenting about what's on your plate or what you're eating, except for you when you're making the decision of whether or not you're going to eat it. And so if you do notice that, like, don't be afraid to kind of stick up for yourself and tell someone like, hey, like, I'd really prefer you not do that. I think we as people like to kind of shy away from conflict, but if that, those little comments do bother you or lead to, poor eating habits or poor, low self-esteem or any of those things, like you should speak out about it. Most importantly, and I can't stress this enough, is if you are struggling to kind of work through these things, don't be afraid to talk to someone about it, ask for support, have someone that kind of guide you through it. But also don't think you have to like restructure everything you're doing and change everything to like just be a little bit healthier. Like start with the small change, focus on that. Most importantly, focus on making sure you have a healthy relationship with food first, and then you can build in habits after that. But, it's also really important to recognize that like most ex-college athletes do go through this at some point, whether it's right when they finish school or whether it's been 5, 10, 15 years down the line. It is something that impacts you every single day, and to be aware of that and to recognize it. That way it's something that you can focus on and develop that healthy relationship with. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Really looking forward to getting back to our normal schedule over the next month or so. So like I said, episodes will drop every Friday morning, and stay tuned for future episodes.